Hello and welcome to another session. From our previous session, we looked at data types and we also went into control structures where I spoke about conditional statements, trying to use the concepts that we're familiar with from our if formulas. And I think I probably mentioned beyond the if statement, which are conditional statements. You could also try your hands on switch statements. I would employ you to try to do some research, so it doesn't seem like I'm just literally showing you everything. I would like for some form of feedback. So try your hands on it, like some research on what switch statements are and where you run into any kind of difficulty. You can just share on the channel and we'll be happy. We other viewers, the community will be happy to contribute to help you understand any concept better. Okay, so in this session, we'll be taking it a notch higher in terms of the control structures, and what we'll be looking at is loops. Loops. So, what are loops, or what is a loop? Think of it this way. I'm quite certain you will have heard that word before, loop. So it means to repeat, to go over something, and to use the technical term, to iterate. So that's like to repeat, to go over something again and again. And one example practical example I can just think of is as a subscriber to this channel and videos you've been watching before getting to this one, and even this one, perhaps you watch and you're not really clear on the concept. I've always implored that you can repeat the video, and YouTube, the YouTube player is one tool that you could just use to set it to repeat, or perhaps your media player, on your device, you could set it to repeat, so it's repeating. Now that action of repeat is a loop action, in practice. Is a loop action in practice. And you can think of it in more terms. Let's just delve into practical instances of a loop, So let's talk more codes, right? Let's talk more codes, and we're just going to continue with this and rethink something. Yes, I'm just going to write for another sub, and I'm going to say sub, which we already understand, and loop. So I'm going to call this first loop, parentheses, we have that bit. I'm just going to put comment here, our first loop action. Okay, so there are different kinds of loops, just same way we have different conditional statements. There are some loops that you specify the number of times you want that track to be repeated. So I'm just giving an instance with your media player. So sometimes you could say, hey, repeat all the tracks, repeat just one track. Now for the loop actions, you're saying, I want you to repeat running this command, this block of code. I think it's just high time I use the proper terminologies. I want you to repeat this block of code, and you could specify the number of times, and in some cases it could be a condition for a condition to be met. So for the different loops, one of such loops, we have the for loop, we have the for each loop, we have the while loop, we have the do while loop, and there are a few others. I also want you to look what those few other loops are. Okay, so here the for loop, just as the word says for, so you need to use the for, the word. Well, what I've just shared is that for the for loop, you're specifying to say, like, for this period, you specify the number of iterations, number of times you want that action or that block of code to be run. So it's typically a number, like an integer. So you could declare it like we've learned using dim. So I'm just going to say our number, and just say num as integer. Now this is because this is the loop variable, right? So integer, and this is optional. You could also instantiate the value of this number. So to instantiate is to pass a value. So we could say num is 1. Okay, here we're setting this value, say, oh, num is 1. And then next up, I start with my for loop. So what do I want to say here now? I want to specify that for num, right, is 1, 2, let's just say 5. I want it to run 5 times, For num, sorry about that. For num is equals to 1 to 5. Okay. Now, I wanted to just take note of what happened next here. When I moved to the next line, it came to this next line. But for proper readability of your code, it's good to indent. So a quick way to indent was just to hit the tab key on your keyboard there. So your code is indented in here. So now what you want to put in here, I just put in the for command, which is basically starting up the loop. But what do I want it to repeat? Which is the block of code, the action you want the computer to run. Okay, so I just want to return an alert, and there's excuse me, there's a property, in the application, the message box is an alert. There are several of them, and there are several ways of writing or using them. You could just use it as it is here, message box, yeah, put it in a parenthesis, and you see what it follows here, the prompt, and then all this, you just like we spoke about in our previous courses of Excel. Whatever you see in square brackets means it's optional. So I can say um, this is the current value of num. Okay, I'm going to give a space here with the appearance and to concatenate values, and I just say num. Sorry, I need to close that. It just formats it. I say num, and all that's next for me to do is just say next, and I go ahead to say no. That is the convention. Now, what happens when I run this? Okay, num is set to 1 here. I see this is the current value of num, and you see it as 1. Recall that I had set num to be from 1 to 5. So if I say OK, it executes what the current value of num is now, iterating, and it's also incrementing the value of num there automatically. So the current value of num is 2, now it's 3, 4, 5. Now when it got to 5, it exited the loop. All right, so just like repeating this block of code, think about it as an action. So an action that you want to perform, an action that you want the computer to execute. But here you're specifying the number of times you want the computer to execute that action. Okay, so I want you to just think of these like practical terms. While we got into macros and VBAs, is that you have sometimes some repetitive actions that you want to carry out, and in this case you actually know the particular number of times that you want this action or activity to be run. That's when you use the for loop. Now, sometimes you don't know the exact number of times that action is to be run, but you want it to iterate through a series. For that, we use the for each loop. Okay, so rather than specifying in here to say like, hey, I want this to be from like 5 times, since you're starting from 1 to 5, so this is just an easy way to say, oh, execute this 5 times. Now, if you're not sure, you could also use the for each loop. Okay, so I'm just going to say for each loop here. I deliberately spelled that wrong. Okay, and I'm going to say for each loop. Okay, for each loop. Now, for the for each loop, well, one of the different things here is you need different variables. Okay, so there is the loop variable, like in the case of our for loop here, which was num. So you need the loop variable, like a num variable or a num value. You also need a collection variable. Okay, let's just see how that is put. All right, so next we're going to just declare a variable, and we're going to call this variable names with a Z, um, as we're just doing that as a worksheet. Okay, look now, please, Windows. We're going to do this as a worksheet, names as a worksheet. Yes, and next up, we're going to just write our for each block. So for each, so here I'm saying for each expression of names in, I'm going to just call this workbook dot sheets. I could say worksheet, but I'm just simply saying sheets in here as it is. I wanted to also send a message, I'll put in a message, returning a message to me, saying currently at, so just like we did the other time, I'm going to just say names, the value of names. I want the value of names to be returned in there. Okay, I want the value of names to be returned in there, and for that, and then you could say next names like this. Okay, and we can execute. There's something missing in here. Okay, okay, names, names dot name. Okay, I think that was the issue. Yeah, so now you can see that it's displaying the name of the worksheet. So yeah, cache it India, and so it's just looping through. If I say the next one, say currently at Jen, currently at Feb, so you're just going to move all through the names of these sheets, in the workbook here. Okay, so now it's time for me to just explain a bit of what happened there, so it doesn't feel like so much food. I declared the name, right? So you recall from when we were learning about variables, when you're declaring your variables, you're to set your variable as a type, the data types. We looked at the common ones, integers, strings rather, for text, and said even for the numbers, there are different kinds of numbers. We just use the integer because it seems to be common, but usually you use what your setting is going to satisfy your requirement or your preference, as the case may be. So that's what this first line here of setting these variable names. Okay, so setting these variable names, simply just set names as a data type of worksheet. Okay, next bit was start writing off the for loop, or in this case here for each loop. So we said for each time, names. So now names, as a variable is going to iterate through this workbook. Now when you're saying this dot annotation to it, it's a is the dot kind of tells you like, oh, a property of the workbook. So we specify the property of the workbook that we want it to look through is the sheets. Okay, so we're saying instead of saying 1 to 5 like the previous case here, I was saying, hey, move through the workbook for all the sheets of the workbook. So if you think about it, just as they are listed in here, your word, it's a list, and that's kind of like what the for each, does. For each, for you're just setting that your loop variable to go over a list. So your list could be dynamic, like in this case, or you could make it to be static, which is like you just writing in an array. So you've already predetermined what your list is. And if you're going to have a predetermined list, you might as well just maybe use a for loop. But where your list is not predetermined, which is the number of times you want your action, your block of code to be executed, it's one of the instances where you can use your a for each loop. All right. So you're saying, hey, this guy here, for the number of times that there are properties in this workbook, which is a sheet, I want you to execute. We just simply put this message box here to output to output that. So the next, just like it's incrementing here, you're saying, oh, so you move to the next value. So which is the next item in the list, the next item in the list. I don't know if it's clear. If you might have to just try this yourself practically, perhaps have your own workbook created with fewer worksheets and just have a practical feel of this, okay? And you come back to it, coming back to it, like looping this video. All right, so think about it. For each, you could use for each as a condition to loop over this video, or you could just say you're going to do this for 3 times. In that case here, you're going to set it to what? 1, 2, 3. Okay, I hope this is coming up a bit. Okay, so just take a breather and we'll continue with the next loop type, which is a while loop. So there's a while loop and it's do while loop. There's while loop and it's do while loop. And that's what we're going to look at next. So I'm just going to start that up and I'm going to say while loops, typo there, but it's something we can just do. Okay, so the while loop, what is the while loop about? When do we use it, and why is it important? um, from practice, I would say the choice of loop is hugely dependent on you, the designer, creator, developer. Just think of what you think of yourself. It's important you just understand the various tools at your disposal, understand them very well so you can make a better judgment call on which to deploy, and when to deploy which. There are usually more than one ways of getting things done. You just need to be sure that you're conversant with all the alternative paths that are available at your disposal. Okay, so having said that, the while loop, you just think of the word while. So the while loop, you're telling the computer to execute a block of code based on a condition that is to be met. Okay, so having said that, I'm just going to set another variable here, and it's going to be a number, okay, as an integer, and we can just simply run with it to say while, sorry, let me also set an initial value for this. So I'm just going to also set this to 1. Now for the loop, I can say while num, which is this value, is less than, or equal to 5. What do I want it to do? Okay, so I can have just another, please don't get tired of the message boxes. Okay, and you can say the value of the number is, just going to put it on there, and there's a keyword to just escape. Just like we had next for this, you could also do this for this here. And now I'm going to run this and see the value of number is what? 1. It's just 1. So here now we have a problem. Oh, let me stop, because you can see that it's still running. So the memory is going to be full. Okay, it's going to be full. Now the problem why that is the case, reason why that is the case is I only set, like instituted, the value of that variable num to 1. However, it's based on this code block here. That variable is always going to have the value of 1. And the condition says while num is less than or equal to 5, do this. So it will always execute because num is always going to be less than 5. You get that? I have to just manually cut off, stop the execution of this, because what's happening here is your memory, the memory of your device, it would just get full. It could be like crashing it in code. Okay, so I just have to figure out a way to stop the program from running, because here now I can see it's running. Okay, so just give me a second now. All right, welcome back. So apparently I had to stop. I had to look for a way, figure out a way to just stop the application entirely from running. Okay, so you've seen practically, right, that when you don't do something right, the correct way, even if you have good intentions, the computer would execute that command you've passed to it. And sometimes a mistake to you could actually lead to your system crashing. Okay, so now you know it can happen to anyone, and it's very important to be very careful while writing any code at this point. Okay, so we're just going to continue from where we kicked off. So I'm going to start over by declaring uh, a variable as an integer, and I had set a value to that variable, an initial value of 1. Okay, and the next thing I said was while norm was less than 5, should we say equal to, okay, fine. Norm was less than 5, wanted it to share a message to say the value of norm is currently, and it should do that. And this was where we made a mistake, is you always need to increment or set a new value. So I'm just going to say a new value of norm should be to add 1 to it. Okay, and I just use a keyword when in here to end that. And now when I run this, see the value of norm is currently 1. I say okay. Now it's 2, 3, it's 4. What happens? It's 5. If I click OK, it comes out of it because it's done with that execution. Okay, so this is what the while loop is. So you can think of it like, is there much difference between what we just demonstrated in the while loop and the for loop that you saw earlier? Okay, they feel, if it looks the same, all right. I would leave it to your judgment. If you feel there's a difference, share in the comment section. If you feel they're the same, and having seen both of them in operation, which would you prefer? And I like to even know why you would prefer any, your choice. Just share that, and so we all could learn a few things. Now, in addition to the while loop, there's also a do while loop. Okay, so I'm just going to write another sub here. It's a do while. They're really putting that typo in there of do while loop. Now, for the do while loop, the difference between a while loop and a do while loop is, for the do while loop, now you similar approach here. I'm just going to say this is 1. For the while loop, the only time when this executes is when this condition is met. So if we were to add 11 to this here now and we try to execute, there's nothing. So let me just put a message box in here to say loop executed. So loop executed. Now let's just take it to 1. I see that it's currently 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it says loop executed. Now the reason I'm showing you that is to say, so you don't think that this merely executed on its own. This is saying this last message box is executing after this entire while loop has done its operation. Okay, now to get to the point which I'm trying to make here, is that the while loop executes based on a condition being set, which is this: while the number is less than or equal to 5, execute this block of code. All right, now for the do while loop, the difference is that you're saying, hey, sometimes you still want a condition to be met, but before the computer, or before you set your computer, your machine, to check if that condition has been met, at least perform this operation once. So still looking at the media player that we're talking about, you're like, oh, before you check if if this song, maybe if it's my favorite song or not, but please just play it once, okay? And if you even think about it, if you turn on shuffle play or random play for media player devices, it still plays, even if it's not your favorite song. And so it tries to play it at least once. So you have the option of like, oh, it's not my favorite song. So I don't know if you're getting the picture I'm just having in my head now. Is it my favorite song? That's the condition. Okay. Now, before you check, how do you know if it's your favorite song or not? The song or the video has to play, right? So do play a song, do play a video, and while it's playing, I can decide if it's my favorite song or not. Okay, so to just bring it here, you can say do, and you can just put the the block of code that you want. Okay, so you can say the value of norm is, and and here we can now set the value of norm. So say norm to be, so just add a value to it, and so it loops, and we can check that condition of what condition while norm is less than or equal to 5. Okay, so now we can execute this. I say the value of norm is 1, so it just goes on to do this. Now if the value of norm here was 11, for instance, it would still execute at least once. I think it's good I just also borrow this guy from here and put in here. So let's set norm to 3. So value of norm is 3, is 4, is 5, and now the loop is executed. If I were to set this to 32, at least it gets executed once, right, before it exits that loop block. Okay, so I don't know if this is a lot. Just take your time and look over this video, share your concerns, areas where you're not clear on, do share them with us here in the community rather, and I'm sure that myself and other members of the community will be happy to jump in to assist. See you in the next video. Bye for now.